"25 years is a long time. I suppose in the journey of the salmon, that's not very many life cycles of the salmon. If you took a 2-2 fish, you might say 6 life cycles of the salmon, or maybe a Tweed fish, 1 year in the river, 1 year at sea, that might be 12 life cycles of the salmon. So in their timescales, perhaps not very much. In ours, quite a long time. But over that time, there has been a quantum change in the way that we carry out evidence-based fisheries management, and SFCC has been at the heart of that, and that is what I'll talk about today. Now, trying to put this talk together was quite interesting, with all the folders randomly distributed all over the place. So I've cobbled it together as best I can. If I've missed anything out, I apologise, but some of the older members here may be able to fill us in with a few anecdotes. So I'll go through the history of the SFCC, the pillars of SFCC, the database, the training and the GIS, and let's reflect on the positives of what SFCC has done. So I'll start with a picture of Ross. If my pointer, come on, it's not working. Well, there is a picture. I'm turning it off and on to see if that does anything. There we are. There's a picture of Ross. Is Ross in the house? No, he's not. Ross is the institution of Marine Scotland Science, but when you look closely at that picture there, there is actually an anode and a cathode in his hand there. So that is the cathode, I believe, and that is the anode. Is that right? So that was, he would have given us all the information about that system, but that was from the 70s or 80s, that equipment. But back then, there were no protocols, there were no standards. And in the 90s, it became apparent that there needed to be standards for assessment. And that was linked to Scottish hydroelectric, which I'll talk about in a moment. If you talked about spatio-temporal biases that Ian talks about a lot these days, they look at you as if you're an alien, I think. So that was the thinking in the mid-90s, and that was the genesis, I suppose, for the SFCC and its creation, which was in 1997. And the aims that were put out for the SFCC to start with, to enhance knowledge of the national fishery resource, promoting collaboration, coordination, exchange in the private sector. So it was a starting point where I would say it's not where we are now, and I'll look at the objectives in a moment, but it was to build a knowledge of the national fishery. I think we can be more concise about it at the moment, but it was really the start of the process. This is a more recent aims and objectives of the SFCC to help its members and others collate, use and provide information on salmon and freshwater fish, their habitats and fisheries in an effective and cooperative way. That is the bread and butter of what SFCC is about. And we had these objectives in the past. We had 3 objectives. I'm not going to read them all out, but within the databases that were at the heart of SFCC, develop standard methods of fish data collection for use through Scotland, scientific workshops and training courses. The bread and butter of SFCC, provide assistance to local fisheries management initiatives, in particular through information technology. The data also integrated into GIS for catchment-based analysis. But in 1997, GIS was in its infancy. ArcInfo, I don't think even exists. ArcMap didn't exist. So they were lofty ambitions, but the technology really wasn't there. And now in the 2000s, the 2020s, we're in a totally different place. And that's what I'll talk about. And provide a high quality research facility based on integrated catchment management approach. So this is interesting that this is different to where we are now. I'm not saying it's wrong or right, but the ambition at the start was to be able to do research within SFCC. The model now that we have, which we see through NEPS and a temperature network, maybe, is the collation of data to standards through SFCC, and then the data goes to people like Ian for the analysis through NEP. So that is the model and how it has evolved. But they were never going to get it right exactly at the start, and those aims and objectives have changed over time. Now, it's important to note here, because Ross Glover is here, Scottish Hydroelectric put in £90,000 to SFCC at the start of it. So I think the 25th anniversary, Ross is going to confirm. Yes, indeed. Yeah, with inflation as well. Yes. But it's a remarkable thing to put that amount of money in from the private sector. So yes, we could continue that conversation. There were other organisations that put money in, of course, the Freshwater Lab, Department of Geography, and the University of have done it. And I don't know who this Anite Systems are. Perhaps one or two of the oldies will know that. But initially, the genesis was partly through Alistair Stephen and his link to Durham University, and it did actually start out at Durham University before it moved up to the lab. So back in 1997, it was actually a chap called Chris Purr who started off, and he was a PhD at Durham, is my understanding, and he came up to the lab, very bright, very competent. He lasted a couple of years before going into the banking sector and making lots and lots of money, but is he happy? Who knows? But he's still, Alistair Stillman is still linked to him. And then it changed a little bit. So Hilary and Jason, is my understanding, were employed. Jason ran the database and Hilary was the GIS side of things. So they had those skills there. I'm told that they had to rely on contract work in order to fund part of the SFCC, and I'll go into that in a minute. And then it's around 2007, James Ortwood replaced those two. James was very diligent in the database side of things, very meticulous. He's gone off, I don't know, his mountain climbing or tuition or something like that. So he's not around anymore. Then there's an interesting interlude where I actually took over the management, not technically the manager of the SFCC, but for employment reasons beyond my understanding, it couldn't carry on through the lab, and there was a gap. So SFCC has never been an organisation. It's never been limited by guarantee. It's never been a charity, anything like that. So it's a name, I suppose, and it has a constitution, etc., like that. But it's not an organisation. I was lumbered then with trying to resurrect SFCC, I suppose, and we looked at a model of employment. We couldn't have a full-time person, so we had to go half post, and that was the employment of Sean. And now my laser might stop working again. Oh, go on, it's stopped working. It's going to say Sean. Look, I'm pressing it. Nothing happening. You've got no answer. I don't know whether it's the battery. You press, but there's going to be a lot of space bar pressing. Oh dear, we're going to have the first technical glitch of the day. So Sean Dugan was the employee that we got into SFCC, and that was a half post. So this was a baptism of fire for Sean, because he went into the Beaver Salmoniid working group, which was extremely difficult, and then also learning the ropes with SFCC, which is a much easier part. He's nodding his head there. And we had to change the employment model where the manager had to go into rafts, and they were extremely unexcited about the liability of that, but we managed to coerce them into the employment of that. Yep, there we are. Well, we've survived the first. So yeah, Sean's been brilliant. Sean gets on with everyone. He's been very good with the GIS side of things, amongst other things, and unfortunately went off to pastures new, but we got Sean to replace. This was the first rebranding, and I suppose I put that up there because it was the reinvigoration, I suppose, at our attempt of re-energising SFCC. So this was the logo that we came up with. Then we went into Fisheries Management Scotland, and there's another rebranding, I suppose. And now we've got Sean Robertson, who's doing a great job. We've said that already, apart from the little technicality there. So some of the ancient history of SFCC, I thought I'd bring this up. There was contract work in 2003 and 2005, and I suppose this illustrates the changes from where we were in the past to where we are now. SEPA came to SFCC wanting data, I think, for the water classification. and there was a task that Hilary, I can't see anywhere, probably induced anxiety, had to take 8,000 records and somehow make an assessment of those records to feed into the Water Frameworks Directive. We didn't have the objective system of NEPs that we had now, so it was a very ad hoc interpretation system where the results were given to the biologists and we manually interpreted it. So it was an extremely difficult job and protracted. Then the site conditioning monitoring from S&H, and again that was on juveniles and adults, and again it was extremely difficult to interpret those results. Jason Godfrey, who I can't see either here, the first thing one of the things he did, which was quite good, was the classification of results into regions with the one run electrofishing. We know there's all sorts of challenges and issues with that, with the knowledge we have now from Ian, but it was, I suppose, the first starting point for objective electrofishing results and feeding into some sort of classification. But that contract era, I think, produced difficulties for SFCC. It bogged SFCC down. Correct me if I'm wrong with that. And so there were some difficulties encountered, I think, in that period. We had an SFCC review by Ian Cowkes, and he touched on some of those. It's quite a long document, but it was very thorough in his review of SFCC and how it can be amended. Note then that there's quite a gap on sort of major contracts or pieces of work between 2006 and then the famous or infamous Wild Fisheries Review. Not too much came out of that with a bearing on SFCC, but SFCC did contribute to the Wild Fisheries Review. But then things come thick and fast through this period here, that we have all these different requests for data and the function of SFCC. So Ian wanted all the data from the database and all the smolt data. SFCC coordinated the collation of data, smolt data throughout Scotland. These were not insignificant exercises. And then the GIS technology, which I'll talk about in a moment, this was SFCC, I was going to say Tweed Foundation, produced or contributed to the salmon distribution map for conservation assessment. And then let's see if anyone can remember what this acronym stands for. But it's the Marine Scotland Local Biologist Liaison Group. So that was to feed into the conservation assessment and to get the opinions and views of the trusts in informing that assessment. And then we had the pressures tool, which was Sean Dugan's era, and then the management plan template. So hopefully I've captured there. There's been other underlying data requests through that period. I think fish distribution, Atlas, and such like, using the database. But that's what I've extracted from the archives of the SFCC. Oh no! Come on. Don't tell me it's frozen again. There we are. Oh. So there's an exciting picture of the desktop-based SFCC databases, the electrofishing database and the habitat database. It's quite hard to find these pictures, but in the midst of time, we didn't have the internet, so everyone had databases on their computers. If you wanted an upgrade, CDs came out and all of the software had to be upgraded. There was a chap called Jeff Simpson based in Durham, who did a very, very good job in developing these databases. When you think that we went from nothing with no protocols to the creation of those protocols, which I think was a painful process, and then to fit that into these databases, I think we did a very, very good job. So databases aren't very exciting things, but they're really, really important things. The story, though, with the database, they're wonderful, but then problems came down the line and it really affected SFCC. Jeff sadly passed away. And then there was intellectual property rights, I believe, with the database. We couldn't get access to the database, and it started falling apart a little bit. And so that led to the process of going online and changing to a different system. There was also the habitat database, which some trusts used, but it was so complex, we decided not to pursue that. So this is where we got to with the electrofishing database, and that was in Bob's era. So thankfully, I wasn't chairman in that period, because the database was a really painful time for the SFCC to take the old database and its structure and then to rearrange it and put it into a new database structure. That was a tough task, and this company Intralate who did it It was an expensive project, but they massively underestimated the complexity of the task. And then once it was online, there was a couple of years of just the problems with it continued. But we got there in the end, and we have a database which is working, and we're going to talk about it, I think, in the afternoon. But we're at this position where there's fish obs and this database, and whether we can actually overcome that challenge and bring them together, who knows? We've never found the answer on that one. We keep dancing around. So the second pillar of the SFCC is training, and Bob wanted a few old pictures here. People that can appear. We all know that person. Well, we all don't all know Nick Chisholm, Ronald Campbell in the middle there. Not sure what's going on here, Jamie. Everyone's looking interested. There's Jackie. I think Rowan trying to identify salmon from a trout, and swelling in the back. So the training started through SFCC and was run by SFCC, my understanding, and then it went into the colleges, and there was the FVQ accreditation, and that worked very well. And now my understanding is that the colleges were no longer interested in running those courses, and now it's gone external. So we've gone full circle in that. But the trainers are brilliant that do it, and they do a very good job in that. Other training courses that we have here, so the GIS competency has gone from almost zero back in the early 90s to most trusts, at least hopefully, being able to open a map. But there is a range of abilities now within Scotland. We have the Grandmaster of Scale Reading, Dr. Campbell, and his history of scale reading is very, very good. It's very popular, the scale reading courses. We've done 2 this year. So it's important that we have standards and training for scale reading, because it can be a dark art and there can be misinterpretation. So doing that sort of course is really, really important. There's Alan Kettlewhite, who does the habitat surveying. We've been to Scene to do our courses. There's been a smolt trapping up on the Kyle, I think, and sweep netting as well. So all really important. I suppose we fill the role of IFM in England. In Scotland, we run all the training courses. Now, the third pillar that we have of SFCC is the mapping innovation that's gone on, and I suppose the technological changes have defined SFCC and what it is, because back in the 1990s, as I've said, ArcMap and ArcInfo only came along in 1999, so there was a couple of years where there wasn't anything. ArcInfo was a command-based horrible system for producing maps, so it was really unuser-friendly. ArcMap was not my favorite software package either. It would just crash randomly without any explanation. So we really were in the infancy of the mapping technological innovation that went on. And QGIS was, I guess, something that came along and really shook up Esri, who own ArcInfo, ArcMap, because this was an open source system, and Esri could see that we were going to all migrate to QGIS open source if they didn't sort themselves out. So we went from paying a lot of money for software for very little, for the most basic system of ArcMap, to suddenly here have everything for £100 a year. So the landscape of GIS quickly started changing. And it was really the advent of ArcGIS Online that has allowed us to do all these different things that the two Seans have been doing for SFCC. So the online concept of being able to take your data, put it online into the cloud, produce maps, share the data, enter data, create apps, tell story maps, that has moved on enormously from 2012 to now. So that has moved rapidly, and that has helped define SFCC and what it has been doing to help Marine Scotland science. We've got now a software package which is much better. So we haven't gone to QGIS. I could add in R there. R can do GIS, but I've never felt the need to do that. But certainly when the lab, they use that. The other innovations that have happened is that data availability has increased massively. So these trusts that don't have much money, having data is really, really important. And back in the 90s and 2000s, getting any sort of data set cost, it was prohibitive to get any sort of data. So we were inhibited by what we could do. SFCC did get some data sets, but say geology was almost impossible to get. There was one river network and an elevation model, but all the background maps, all the ordnance survey data that we can now get. It may not necessarily always be high resolution, but the data landscape has changed immeasurably. And on top of that, the GIS competency is increased massively. So there are trusts like the Forth that have a GIS officer, and they're using GIS all the time. We use GIS on a daily basis, and it's improved the way that we communicate what we're doing on a daily basis. So some examples of the successes of SFCC. So it was Sean Dugan that did the salmon distribution map. If we didn't have ArcGIS online, how would we do this? Would this have been a paper-based exercise with ordnance survey maps? I think we were swithering perhaps about whether to do that for some trusts. But this was the first success, I suppose, of online GIS and SFCC assisting Marine Scotland in that process. And there maybe was some pain in it, Sean, but I think it was a successful exercise. We went through that. Then there's a salmon pressures tool, and I see that's come online in the last few weeks. So again, that was Sean Dugan, and that was successfully delivered by the SFCC. And now we have the management plan template, which Sean probably needs to tell us what we need to do. Get on with it. That includes myself. So I'm sure that's going to be a success as well. Reporting apps we've touched on, but there's a myriad of apps out there, and we can continue to develop new apps as well. You can make apps for your own rivers trust, but there are all sorts of applications there, which is changing the landscape. And it's not just us that are using these apps; it's the common people, the anglers, etc., that can also use these apps as well. So just to end then, to reflect on where we are, I think we're in a better place than we've ever been with SFCC. And there are a number of reasons for that. Technology has defined SFCC and what we can do. We work in a way that is completely different to where we were in the 1990s. And I think the people back then would be amazed at where we are now. The concept of SFCC has remained through all the turbulence of changes, whether it's RAFS to Fisheries Management Scotland, renaming of Marine Scotland Science. And SFCC has remained because the concept works. That it brings together all the different organisations, and people believe in it. So even in the difficult times when SFCC wasn't delivering perhaps as much as it should have been, people remained as members because we believed in the concept. Yep, as we've kept the membership, so people were unhappy at certain periods, but through those difficult times, we retained those membership. And it's hard times. It's hard for trusts to raise that money. I think that, I don't know where we are with is it £1,000? Or was it £1,200? The membership fee has not changed since 1997 or negligibly. So you've managed to find that money to continue the membership, and the concept of SFCC has remained. And now we're within Fisheries Management Scotland. We're stable administratively. So the eras of myself and Bob, where there were all these challenges, I'd say that Joe and Marcus have had an easier time of it. And then thanks to all our hard work in the past. So I suppose I'd just like to end that in 25 years' time, I'm looking around and I'm hoping that there's someone else in this audience that will still be here, and that they will give the 50-year anniversary celebration, maybe some champagne that time. Thank you.